Well, I'm very happy to say I'm with Barry Zworestine, who's in Sydney, Australia, former Rhodesian soldier, combat veteran, who's written a book about post-traumatic stress. And Barry, I think this is going to be of great interest to a lot of people. And I just want to say that in my, amongst my contemporaries, more and more, I'm interacting with old soldiers who I think are starting to feel the stresses more now the older they get. I think a lot of chaps have locked things away, and it's bubbling up. And there are a couple of guys who I won't mention who I'm quite concerned about. There's a lot of suppressed anger for regarding things that happen that they've kind of blocked, but are finding it more difficult to do so. And well, you know as much about the Rhodesian Army as I do, but it wasn't really a place for sissies, I suppose. I mean, there wasn't much provision for chaps who were struggling. And when you think about what some of the blokes went through, they probably needed some sort of assistance outside of the odd chaplain. There was really nobody to turn to if you were having psychological issues. The approach was dry your eyes and get on with the job. Don't cowboys don't cry. So
Yeah.
Barry, over to you. Just tell us about your book and what motivated you to write it.
Okay. I'll jump back to what you were saying, Hannes. I think you're spot on. I did a first little book quite a while ago, and then I took it off because I wanted to create a bigger, better book. But that was called Which Way Was Your Claymore Facing? And I always say to the guys, every one of us, it doesn't matter how deep you were into the war in Rhodesia, but everybody's got a claymore somewhere locked away in some room. Now, the one thing we do know is that there's a limit to how much exposure you can have to combat before stuff begins to happen. And, the proof of that is, if you take your Green Berets or your SEAL teams or your Delta Force, there are guys there with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I don't say, I always say that I was an extremely ordinary soldier in a extraordinary war. We were up in 3 INDEP and the usual 4-man sticks, and I was a medic in a 4-man stick. And it was certainly nothing like the Salute Scouts or the SAS or the RLI had, which was a very extreme war. But even, guys from my territory, I would say we probably came out with a bit of combat stress, hypervigilance, waking up several times a night, stuff like that. But you spot on when you talk about the aging process, because, I know when I came out of the war, the proof of it was, 2 marriages and 5 immigrations. Now, that's not a normal cycle of living. Plus, as you know, when we came out, I don't think any of us even associated any symptoms we had with the war. We just came out and got into life because there was very little known about the war. But so many of us go into extreme activities, whether it's skydiving, we're pushing the edges all the time. And I know that for me, it was marathon and ultramarathon running. And I was just running and running and running. So somebody actually said to me one day, they said, so what you running away from? And that was a real kick in the nuts, so to speak, because they were right. Now, I've always had a theory that the units in the Rhodesian War that were exposed to 5-6 combat arenas every day, I believe, and you kind of reaffirm it, is that those guys now, we're all in our late 60s, and stuff's beginning to unravel. And I think a part of it is chronology and a sense that life is shortening. I think a part of it is that the physicality that you have to be able to drink yourself ahead of it, or rage yourself ahead of it, or physically do stuff that locks off the symptomatology, that's wearing thin. And I think we're at a very high level of risk as a generation at this point in time. And, you raise a lot of very relevant kind of evidence, which is extreme drinking, depression, anxiety, hyper alert to environment, hyper reactive. And, I had a woman, I supported Rhodesians for many years, and I still do, but a smaller number now around the world. at no cost. It was just something I did as guys contacted me. And a woman said to me, she said, look, I need to talk to you, but my husband was very highly placed in the army, but there was such severe abuse at home that I can't really make this go public. Another mate of mine who was ex-South African recce, but his father was in one of the Rhodesian elite units. He told me about just the physical abuse and the violence that went on at home. Now, none of this is who we are as a people. Trauma is not who we are. Trauma is what we carry. And I think when you do describe that, you're dealing with a generation of men now that are starting to unravel, I think we're in a very serious point. And I think there's also quite a refusal to start to look at and try to deal with what's happening inside people's bodies and their brains. And the one thing I do know is that guys are not ready to talk. But, war and trauma is energy stored in the body, and they're body-based modalities that you can use, breathing techniques where you tap on acupressure points. And they are in use. They're in use in military units around the world. And if guys were willing to do that, they could already work with what's happening. A lot of the Rhodesians I worked with over the years, that's all I could do by WhatsApp was just simply flick them. It's like I call them pull-through tools. And if you're not doing a pull-through tool, if you're not doing a pull-through every day, the equivalent to an ADS stoppage and a runaway gun is explosive anger, depression, anxiety, or you're just completely out of control. And so when I do talk to the guys, I talk to them about, we need to look at what your pull-through is. We're looking at guys that have put on weight, bad eating, a lot of alcohol use, and they've deteriorated from very fit, strong young men, and even that adjustment. So yeah, Hannes, it's a mess, and it's a storm that's brewing hell of a close to all of who we are.
What I think compounded it, when you think about it, for a lot of the guys who risked so much and fought so hard, the denouement, the end, was highly unsatisfactory. When you think that these chaps who'd given their all suddenly are just told, thanks for coming, it's over.
Yeah.
Pack your bags, no thank you, no medal parades, no support network, really. It's just get on your bike. We've lost. And that's the other issue is, from a military perspective, it's highly questionable that the war was lost. We understand that there were other factors that came into it, but ultimately, for a lot of the fighting soldiers, they weren't ready to give up. They were told to give up, and that's particularly tough for guys who now, and they're getting on in age, and life has not got any easier. And there's this anger about I'm in this situation because of what happened then. I don't, apart from lending an ear to chaps that I know and just trying to be there for them, I don't have any answers. I don't know what you suggest. How does one deal with it?
I think Hannes, the ending of the war, we talk a lot about moral injuries. Now, there's two aspects to moral injury. The one is when you've seen and had to do something during the war that really crosses boundaries, and ultimately when you look back on it, it offends your values, or it's a wound to your values. But then you've got another level of moral injury, which is what you describe as overnight, you suddenly don't belong. You just shifted out, and your identity, your sense of belonging, and even for us, who we were as a nation, is cut off. And that itself is a moral injury. We were dislocated as a tribe. I mean, I remember I came to Australia first time around 1980 on the Zimbabwe Rhodesian passport. And I then had to apply for a Zimbabwean passport and sent in my money, and that was it. And I must admit that today, it's still difficult for me not to feel angry and betrayed and cut off from, we are Rhodesians. I'm not a Zimbabwean, I'm a Rhodesian, and it's not a racist statement. It's a statement of identity and belonging. And we're proud as a nation. And as a nation, you know, for me, it's black and white. And so, you know, we dislocated. We scattered around the world, struggling. And that moral injury is huge. The other thing, though, is that, you know, it's 20 years I've been working, not just with the Rhodesians, but I work with an organization, a government organization, counseling organization solely for veterans. And that's all I've worked with outside of my job in a school. And it doesn't matter whether I've been working with SAS or commandos or elite units or just ordinary people on the ground, men and women. When I scratch away everything, there's one common denominator that lies within all of us, and I include myself, which is grief. The most profound grief which lurks in the corners of who we are. And, you know, grief is loss of mates, loss of identity, loss of purpose. It just, and you know, the one thing about grief is that it's the last place as a bloke that we want to go. I've yet to meet a bloke, and I include myself, who's comfortable in grief. It's far easier being angry and being explosive, but it's grief, eh? And so when you talk to the guys, you know, I think it's better to have a conversation and to be able to have a conversation with someone than nothing at all. At least when you're talking to a mate and you're not sitting in the dark of your room with a bottle, or, you know, as many people have got to, is a revolver next to you, you know, working yourself up to suicide. It's far better to reach out. But also what's interesting, Hannes, is that, you know, we're looking at the suicide rate now is huge, eh? And I don't know what the stats are for suicide rates in Rhodesians, but they certainly don't seem as high. We're looking at 22, 23 a day. I don't think we have such a, the statistics are so high. And I think a part of that is because there was meaning in what we did, and there was a sense of belonging. We weren't fighting in someone else's country. But yeah, Hannes, I think if you can just keep talking to people, and you know, my book's probably a little, its focus is primarily on transitioning. But I think even though we are, you know, late 60s now, I think we're still transitioning. We're still trying to find a place where we belong. And I think that's really painful. And so the book, in a way, it's a roadmap. And because I think a lot of us we didn't really realize, our generation, how complex that transitioning process was. I mean, I went from my company to UCT in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, I was in residence, waking up 20 times a night with headaches. And I didn't even have an idea that it was linked to that. And even now, I think there's still the sense of, where do we belong? And I think the book in itself maps out, I always call it operationalizes the territory, so guys can know where they're at, and then it gives them tools and understanding. And I always say that if you don't know where you are in the transitioning territory, it's like you've got no map and you've got no compass, but you want to get from A to B effectively. Well, it's not going to work. So the book essentially provides that. I think it's more relevant for the newer bunch of guys, but I think where it can certainly help is if guys are willing to sit down with their wives. Now, in my book, there's a letter I wrote. It's called A Letter from a Veteran to Whoever, wife, husband, and it words the stuff that we find almost impossible to talk about. I can't talk about stuff with my wife. It's just too painful. And she has to kind of really push. And I realized that if guys had something that they could hand over to their wife and go, read this, and this is what it's about. And it talks about the grief, and it apologizes for the loss of control and irritability, but it talks from the heart. And so the book also is some way of creating a bridge of understanding and healing with sometimes the mess that we've made and that has trailed us for most of our lives. So, you know, I've not had any Rhodesians look at it. A lot of my work is in the States, but it would be interesting to get some feedback from a Rhodesian or a couple of Rhodesians as whether they found aspects of it. You know, it's got a lot of lessons that I learned from ultramarathon running. which is exactly the same from operations when, you reach a limit and you don't want to go on. And it's got practical kind of little, I call them little bites of, get up, dust off, sit down, but get up and dust off. And they're things that hopefully can inspire guys. But what people need most of all is contact, and that's where like the RLI Association, the SAS Association, 5 of us started the Rhodesian Watering Hole. David Chadzako and I think Jerry McGann, and that was its goal, was to create a tribe for people to belong to and share. And I think that's the advantage of having portals where not everybody's shouting and being blokey and drinking, but where people are having conversations and starting to also be honest with each other.
I think you're right, Barry. When I look back on difficult times, what really was essential to helping you overcome challenges was friendship and camaraderie, and being with your friends. You're all in it together, and that gives you terrific strength, inner strength. And later in life, a lot of the chaps have been separated from that comradeship. And I think that's where they find themselves in very lonely places. And it's very difficult to relate to people who don't know where you're coming from. So, this is my argument. I don't see an awful lot of point, and I know nothing about it, but going to some psychologist or who has no idea what you've been through, that person, through no fault of theirs, is not really in a position to offer much assistance. Do you agree with that?
Look, I think part of the reason for the book is that, we're getting professionals trained in 1 or 2 modalities. And, I often say when you go to war, it's like you don't carry one weapon. So how come you're going to be working with soldiers or veterans and you've got 1 or 2 things to offer? And a lot of it is about talking with not too much understanding about the territory or the language of veterans. And the book, one of the drives of the book is to help people working with veterans to become more informed. So, when a guy comes to you for the first time, the rule is he sits where he wants to sit. And if your chair is facing the doorway and he sits in your chair, you move. The second thing is, like, you have to earn the right to really be accepted by a veteran. It's not the other way around. I also think, Hannes, at 67 to 69, 72 years old, we're not driven to talking about things that happened 47 years ago. But I do know that when we start looking at what pull-throughs, your pull-throughs could be you start to eat less and get a healthy diet. Try and reduce your alcohol. Don't cut it out. Just try and reduce it.
Right.
If you put a hell of a lot of weight on, try walking around the block every day. There was a Navy SEAL, Admiral McCraven, and he wrote a book called Make Your Bed, a little book. And his whole basic philosophy was get up every day and make your bed. Because I often say to the guys, when you do something proactive, you move from the back seat of your vehicle to the front seat. So you still may be driving through a storm, but you're driving. You've got some control. And so part of it is a big part of what I do, and I think we should be doing with the guys, is encouraging people that it's never too late to take charge of your weight, your alcohol, your sleep. There are simple tools. Hannes, there's a technique he's a crazy Dutchman, I think he is. And he walked halfway up Everest with a pair of shorts on and swam under the polar cap. But he uses extreme cold. And one of the things he does encourage people to do is the cold shower therapy, because, especially when you're cranking up, for those that are going to listen to this, the basic way in which the brain operates is, if you imagine the back of your brain as your ambush zone. When your trip flares start going and your claymores start firing, nobody's thinking. Everything is pure emotion. It's aggressive. It's assaultive. The front of the brain is like your OP. When you're on OP, you can think, you can plan, you can see, you can assess. Now, what we want to do is we want to teach guys when they're in their ambush zone, we want to teach them how to get into their OP. And I often say to the guys, if you are out of control or if you're having a panic attack, just climb into a cold shower for 60 seconds. your body cannot stay in panic. It literally kicks your brain down. And, you know, I took on a personal challenge about 1.5 years ago. And for 1.5 years ago, 365 days a year, doesn't matter what the weather is, I've only had cold showers. It's impact. So I call it an emergency protocol. There are simple breathing techniques. There's a technique where you tap on acupressure points. We don't know why, but when they scan the brain, it literally kicks down the back of the brain. So, you know, if you think about, this is the war with the trauma that went with it. Here's the emotion encapsulated and locked in around it. It's not going to move after so many years. But when we tap, and it's a specific technique, but you can slowly lift away all or a percentage of that emotion. So instead of being 10 out of 10 out of control, you may go down to 7, to 6, to 5. And I always tell the guys, you don't have to tap on trauma because you can re-traumatize yourself. Don't tap on a mate that was killed next to you. What I say to them is that tap on just, even though I'm feeling really anxious and stressed, and I've got this anger in my body there. It's a technique which combines saying things and tapping on points. And I've seen guys literally, there was one, I think he was RLI. That's a long time ago. Eh? And he did what I gave him for about 3-4 months. And that was it. Eh? He was back on track. So there are simple tools, the breathing techniques, the tapping, the cold water, a bit of exercise, or for guys that are capable, you know, start moving your body, put dopamine in your brain. So you see, Hannes, you don't have to go through the talking cure to create change. You don't need to do that. And certainly not for our generation. I think we're too long in the tooth, and we come from a generation where the talking cure was just nothing, no idea where we wanted to go to. And I mean, you know, my wife has a good laugh. I'm a psychologist, and they're probably the last people I'd go and see. And I feel that resistance in a lot of my generation. But, you know, Hannes, there's one thing also I want to say that we don't track, hey? And I think this is rife in the Rhodesian War, is shame. Not feeling good enough. Shame of not feeling good enough. You know, I have, I know somebody in a tier 1 unit in the States, and he was in charge of a unit. And he said to me, I feel shame because I wasn't in enough combat like the other guys. And I first tracked this at a march here in Sydney many years ago, where the RLI were there in their force, and the SAS were there, and some SAS and some Salute Scouts. And I looked at these guys and I thought, geez, you know, I don't deserve to be here. And I remember that feeling of not feeling good enough. And that was really haunting. And eventually a Rhodesian officer said to me, he said, you know, the very fact of putting your foot in territory, you are good enough. It doesn't matter the depth of it, but you're good enough. And over the years, I've tracked every bloke I've sat with and checked in for shame. And as uncomfortable as it is, it's in virtually 90% of the people I've been with. You might not have been able to help a bloke. You might not have gone on enough contacts. You might not have seen a lot of action. Shame, shame, and more shame. So you can see how complex it is that guys are carrying it. PTSD is one thing, but shame, identity, purpose, capability, belonging, that's separated from PTSD. And so there's something that I call PMTC, post-military transitioning challenges, not PTSD or PTS as we prefer, because I don't think we're disordered with trauma. Trauma is what we have. It's not who we are. But a lot of folk don't have PTSD or PDS. They have post-military transitioning challenges. And if you think about it, you come out the military, you're struggling to make a living, you're hooked into alcohol, your life deteriorates, your marriage falls apart, you're alienated from your kids, you're going to look traumatized, but the depression that comes with that is because you've never been able to adjust from the challenges of shifting from the military into civilian life.
You know, you talk about shame and regret, and he's dead now, but we became very good friends in the hunting world, and he was a former regular Salute Scout. And he was haunted by the fact that towards the end of the war, he really found himself in a bad place. He he'd been through too much, and he was in a state of, I don't know how you describe it, but he went to his officer commanding and he said, please, I need a break. I need to get my head right. And this wasn't treated very sympathetically, put it that way. It was, well, go, and he was given a job in the stores as a sort of quartermaster, while he tried to come to grips with things. And that's when the war ended. And so he was sitting in the stores at the end of the war, and it haunted him for the rest of his life. He spoke to me about it several times, and he ended up drinking himself to death. And I think it was that sense of shame, a deep sense, profound sense of regret. He performed at such a high level, and then it all ended for him at a very low level. Yeah. And he couldn't undo that memory.
No. And if you think about it, he's a classic example of, because of a natural impact of so much combat over time, his brain started to shut down. But instead of being supported and being helped to maintain a sense of his integrity and capability, he was shunted off into stores, which is, again, we're talking about moral injury, the shame, and then all the disintegration that comes from that. And, you put it spot on, is that this will haunt a guy till he dies, or he kills himself, or drinks himself to death. The other thing, Hannes, is that we can become institutionalized. And so we actually incapable of adjusting. And I think the evidence of that is, the question is, how many Rhodesians are still fighting in contract jobs overseas, or maybe flying choppers? And there are, we certainly know that there are. And that sense of you're lost. If you stay long enough, you can never, ever return. And the problem is, a 72-year-old bloke still trying to fight a war. At some point, you're running out of brownie points, eh? And then what?
It gets me thinking, as somebody who knows a little bit about military history, when you think of the frontline Rhodesian soldier, some of those chaps were in the thick of the action for over 10 years. Now, I don't know any soldiers in any army in modern military history who come out of that sort of background. I mean, the guys went to Vietnam, most of them went for a year. I think a couple went for 2 years. We've had the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and stuff, but not many fighting men have been exposed to danger on such a regular, continual basis for as long. It's quite astonishing when you compare it.
Yeah, and I think there's a tribute to the Rhodesians. If you look at, for me, it's always, you take the RLI and being dropped by chopper into several contacts a day. Hannes, there is no other war that anybody has sustained that level of combat. And I think they did remarkably well as men in the most adverse situation and prolonged exposure over time. But at the end of the day, we're human, hey? And it doesn't matter how capable you are, stuff starts to happen. And all you have to do is just ask the guys, or ask guys who guys who are angry, who drinking hard, who difficult to be around, who isolated, who are struggling hard to function in jobs. There's all your symptomatology that tells you that very few people got away with it. Now, I've seen people, some of the special force guys here who've sustained a lot of tours in Afghanistan, but are okay. But, I think you spot on, where there's not many people that kept this going year after year after year after year. I think the Rhodesians did something that I don't think has ever been repeated. When you tell people they jumped from 500 feet into contacts, they look, I know the Rhodesians in America are spoken of incredibly highly. But geez, Hannes, it was, hell, it's had a terrible price to pay, hey?
Yeah, it's a hell of a story. What's been quite interesting about doing these talks, apart from the fact that I've learned a hell of a lot of, as I've gone along, it's been a real learning curve for me, but the number of soldiers abroad who are currently in modern armies, what really does blow them away, get their attention, is how little the Rhodesian soldier had to work with and what was expected of him. We did just assume that that was normal, but in the light of today, it all suddenly looks quite remarkable. Just the level that the Rhodesian soldier performed at consistently with so little backup, and certainly very little psychological support for chaps who were struggling with the mental stresses and strains of combat.
Completely. And, if you think about it, where in the world do you send, I don't know what, 60, 70, 80 people to take on 5,000? Where in the world are there 4 people, 4-man sticks, and they're not special force?
No.
Everybody was working like special force, 4-man sticks where, terrorists could walk around, certainly 3 in-depth, which is where I was, there was that contact with 300. That's never been heard of again, Hannes. It's, and I still maintain that as a nation and as a people, did we lose a war? We were manipulated out and lied to. I don't think we lost anything, but we were shamed and disregarded and humiliated as a people to some extent, just spat out and left. But, geez, they did as an extraordinary nation, when we talk about what happened with sanctions and how Rhodesians just started, whatever they could make, they made, and what they couldn't make, they'd steal. It was, they're often a lot like the Israelis, highly inventive. But again, I always come back to the fact that we have never had support. I have never had support. I've talked to very few guys that have actually seen people. And in fact, recently in the UK, I was speaking to Dave. He was in the Rhodesian Army, he runs an organization, a charity called Icarus. And that's the first charity that will see anybody anywhere. So Rhodesians could use that, anyone could use that. But outside of that, for years, it was, I don't know who else was doing it, but, I was just catching a handful of guys around the world. And that's nothing. That's a drop of water in a pond. So people have just been sitting with us, for a year, 47, 48 years, people have been sitting with all this stuff lurking in the middle of themselves. So, I think we can still do more. I think when we have organizations that support veterans, they must also not just embody that sense of we tough and we unbreakable, but they also have to offer people an opportunity to start to get real and to realize that not feeling good enough or having grief or having contributed to the messes in their lives, it's okay to talk about that and share that with guys we trust. We should never feel shamed by sharing those parts of ourselves. We don't have to go into specific details, but we need people to get real with. Otherwise, all we're doing is we're creating a movie while we're hollowing out in the middle of ourselves. And I remember seeing, I listened to a lot. I've read all your books, they're in my library. And I've listened to large numbers of your podcasts. And I remember seeing you one day, your heart was aching. You could see that. So again, I come back to the sadness as a nation. Geez, Hannes, we carry a truckload of grief in the middle of ourselves, from every level.
Barry, what I would, I get very emotional thinking about what happened, and just so sad how it all ended up. But, at the end of the day, I still think we can all be a little bit proud of the fact that we did try. And that's something that we all share. Some tried harder than others, but we did try. We made an impression. And, one of the reasons why I've always wanted to write and want to do these talks and stuff is because I just want the world to know, well, as many people as possible. And I know we don't get to many people, but just what it was all about. I just get so angry being condemned as a racist or as a white supremacist. You know, that really makes me extremely angry. And the only thing I can do is to try and get the message out by talking to people like yourself, you know, who can explain to people what it was all about and what we were all about.
Yeah. Look, it's the same as the Vietnam boys. You know, when they came back, they were called baby killers. And certainly what we didn't have is what they unfortunately had, was when they got back to Australia, they were vilified, and they couldn't even integrate. At least, you know, when we'd go on R&R, we belonged to a country where we were proud of it. But yeah, it's a struggle. And, you know, I've had conversations with people who've vilified the Rhodesians and called us killers. And, you know, I think as long as we realize it's not who we are, look, in any war, I always maintain that our war was probably one of the dirtiest wars ever fought. And in those days, people were not carrying webcams, and there were not prohibitions of going all the way up the line and getting permission to do stuff. People did what had to be done. And my whole approach is that war is dirty and stuff happens. But, you know, it was a war that, because it was quite extreme and severe and a harsh war, even more so the impact that people carry. But we can change it, Hannes. You know, it's never too late to heal to some extent. It's never too late to start to understand that you're okay. It's not what you carry doesn't define you. It's what you carry. And there's simple ways that you can start to dig yourself out of that. And there's simple ways that you can start to repair the messes that you might have made within your own families.
Well, Barry, thanks for your time. And I salute you in the efforts you've made. And I know you've reached out to a lot of people and helped a lot of people. And you know, that's a wonderful effort you've made. And I take my hat off to you, and good luck with the book. And I hope some of the guys out there who are looking for guidance will reach out and read your book. And
yeah, look, Hannes, also, you know, I think I sent you the ebook. That's a PDF. Did I send it to you? If not, I'll send it to you.
Yes, I think you have. Yeah,
Hannes, you are free to flick that far and wide at no cost.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not. This is not about making money. This is about, you know, I always maintain if we can do a little bit of service, it's part of the healing as well. So, you know, you're welcome to flick that out. And
thank you, Barry. I appreciate that. There are a few guys who spring to mind immediately who I'm worried about, and I don't have all the answers. So I'm very grateful to you. I'll take you up on that offer and see if I can't help a few guys.
And also, Hannes, you can give them my number. They can connect on WhatsApp. I can't give a lot of time. I'm just trying to slow down. My bones are getting a little bit tired after 20 years of this. So, but I'm happy to talk to them, give them the stuff that I do every single day of my life, and that they can start to do, and I can monitor it over time, and they can keep contact with me as needed. I mean, there's one bloke I flick messages, it was daily for several years, and now every few days for several years. And I'm happy to do what I can to the guys that are really just wanting to try and find a different way to feel human again before they die.
Thank you very much, Barry. You're a good man.
Okay,
I appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity, and really thanks for everything you do, man. Your books have a pride of place, and my one son is going to inherit I've got a collection. I've got an extraordinary collection I've been collecting over the years, and my one son is going to carry my heritage. I mean, my other boy's a cop, so he's busy. He's in service anyway. But my one son in the UK is going to carry that heritage and the books you've written, that, and they are special. So thank you.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. I appreciate it, Barry. Thank you. And I'm just pleased if I'm managed to make some sort of a contribution to getting the record straight.
Huge, Hannes. Everything you're doing is part of reparation, and every part of that helps people to feel proud about themselves, even though they may be struggling. Yeah, that's a big shift.
Barry, thanks, my friend. and have a
Yeah.
super Sunday.
Yeah, you too. Cheers, Hannes. Bye.
Cheers, Barry.